So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Great Data Debate. This is the second time we did this. We did the first one last year, which was a great session. And so I'm really honored to have our distinguished guests here. So let me walk through them one by one, and then hopefully introduce you to everybody on stage. Okay, so on my immediate left is Amit. Amit Prakash is co-founder and CTO of ThoughtSpot. He's been in large-scale analytical systems for a long time. Prior to ThoughtSpot, he had multiple analytical engineering teams at Google. He was participating in Google AdSense business and contributing more than $50 million quarter on quarter to the business through improving analytical algorithms there. And then prior to that, he was a founding engineer on the Bing project at Microsoft and implemented PageRank algorithms there from scratch. He's a PhD from University of Texas and holds a bachelor's degree from the Indian Institute of Technology. So welcome, Amit.
Thank you.
Okay, so next to Amit is Rob. Rob Thomas is General Manager of IBM Data and Watson Artificial Intelligence. He directs product investment strategy there, sales and marketing, expert labs, and global software development. Rob leads global data and AI initiatives from everything from database, data integration, governance, BI, planning, data science, and AI tools. And he is responsible for all of IBM's Watson, DB2, Netezza, Cognos, SPSS, and InfoSphere brands. And he's been participant in over $2.5 billion of acquisition for IBM. And as the author of 2 books as well. Okay, so next to Rob is Dan Streetman, CEO of TIBCO. Welcome, Dan. Dan is led the digital transformation and growth in several companies prior to TIBCO. He was Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing at BMC Software, repositioning the company as a leader in multi-cloud management. And then prior to that, he was Vice President of Alliances and Channels at Salesforce and has held field positions in field operations, strategy, product organizations at C3.ai, Allwith Financial, Amdocs, and Siebel. And Dan is a former airborne ranger, served in Operation Iraq Freedom, and is a recipient of Bronze Star Medal and the Douglas MacArthur Award. He's also an avid triathlete, so I'm not going to join you for a jog later on, Dan. I hope you don't mind that one. Anyway, but welcome all the same. And finally, we got Charles Fetes, and Charles is Azure SQL Data Warehouse Principal Group Programming Manager at Microsoft. You saw Charles this morning actually demoing along with Rohan Kumar here in the keynote theater. So again, he's responsible for the Azure SQL Data Warehouse and of course Azure Synapse Analytics, which was just announced this morning by Rohan here at the conference. And has been working on distributed platforms for over a decade. And his team works with customers and partners around the world on the Azure SQL Data Warehouse, particular focus on ISV integration, large-scale migrations, and developing content for customers for a streamlined experience. Anyway, welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for taking time and coming from halfway around the world in a lot of cases to be here. And we're really grateful to see you here. I want to start the debate really looking at, I guess, the challenge around managing data and analytics. You know, we seem to be now in a world where the landscape is way more complicated than it ever used to be. Certainly when I started out, we were in data centers in a mainframe. Nowadays, we seem to be beyond the data center. We're into not only one cloud, we're into multiple clouds. We're going all the way out to the edge, and so this kind of sprawl of data, if you like, is getting further and further out there. And yet, executives want innovation. They want you to deliver, turn on a dime, move rapidly to be able to disrupt. And at the same time, they want innovation to be able to do that. They want, it seems that they want strategy, they want to be able to, they want technology, they want the whole culture to come together. But for me, it seems that different departments are doing their own thing, buying their own technology. And yet, therefore, the strategy and the culture thing seems to be a really big issue. It's not so much just the technology, but what do you think is needed really in a strategy in order to succeed in this kind of multi-cloud complex world now? Because there's an awful lot of pieces, we're spread out all over the place. How do you see that coming together in order to be able to try and coordinate and achieve overall success? Anyone want to pick that up? Dan?
Sure. I think that you nailed it, which is, in many aspects, Agile should be a call to action. In many cases, it became an excuse. And so you have, information all the way out to the edge, you have information in silos. And so the first thing you have to really do is understand what you need to do to connect that, and understand that while multi-cloud and hybrid might have been a fact of life, and it's what we've inherited, it's now an explicit strategy. We will never see all the pertinent data in one place, in one instance, or even one cloud, ever. So managing that and thinking about what you need to do to first connect to all those systems. What we use at TIBCO is the idea of how I unify my view of the data, which includes governance and the metadata around it. And then finally, once I know where that is, to go do compute or to augment my intelligence doing the analytics against it. And we think that's got to be a full cycle motion, and acknowledge that we are never going to harness all pieces of data ever again. And as we put more and more sensors out to the edge, that's going to continue to be a place where we gather information. We want to be able to see it, to compute against it, to augment our intelligence, but recognize we live in a multi-cloud world. And so connecting, unifying, and augmenting in a cycle is where we see the future at TIBCO, and acknowledging that it might have started off as not necessarily a planned strategy, it is the reality. We don't see it ever going back to a single data lake again.
This can't be bottom up, though. It's got to have some kind of top-down organizational over the top of this. Rob, AI ladder that IBM talk about has organized right heavily in the middle of it. It seems to me that's the big problem, right? How on earth do you harness all of these initiatives in order to, make them pull on the same rope?
So two thoughts first on multi-cloud. I believe multi-cloud will be driven by containers. Containers become the common fabric for how you modernize your applications, modernize your data, build once, run anywhere. I think that's fundamental to multi-cloud. Your point on the AI ladder, we built this concept called the AI ladder, which is how do you understand the levels of sophistication for how you're managing your data so that you can be successful with AI, from how you collect data, organize your data, analyze your data, ultimately begin to infuse AI models into the business. Regardless of what cloud you're on, you need a single data strategy that assumes a world of multi-cloud. And what you're doing in data should be about how do you achieve your ambitions for AI, because AI is what will enable you to make better predictions, get to better outcomes. So data and AI are two sides of the same coin, I would say, but that is driven or fueled by the multi-cloud architecture that Dan was talking about.
Right, but there's still the cultural problem here.
Yeah.
You can buy all the technology you want, it can be integrated, but how do you get the people to move?
Well, there's three pieces to it. So yes, you got to have the technological underpinnings for whatever you're going to go out, but that's just a piece of it. We like to think then your next step is understanding what your strategy and your people are doing to leverage that infrastructure. And at the top of that is culture, right? We can quote Peter Drucker all day long, and that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It eats technology for breakfast as well. If you don't have a culture of innovation, but also a culture of collaboration around that data, that's where your key challenge is. Not just identifying what's most important to your organization. Is it faster decision making? Is it more accurate? Is it fraud in the moment, or is it fraud over the long term? So understanding what your priorities are, driving a culture where people can innovate but come back to the core for collaboration, that's table stakes in a high-performing organization.
Okay. You want to add anything to that? Or
Yeah, so I think culture is an easy scapegoat to blame on. But if you talk to people, when you talk to people, they really want to do the right thing. The problem really lies with the tools. I think these tools have been built with an inside-out view where engineers are building things for mostly people like engineers. And what needs to happen is that all these applications need to take a consumer view and build applications that are really easy to use, that are a pleasure to use. And then you will see lots of people actually using these tools and culture changing on its own. It's easy to blame it on people that they don't want to change, they're resistant to change, and that is true to some extent. But a lot of responsibility lies on us as well as technologists who are building these products.
Right. I don't know, however, so I agree with you. I think one of my observations is there is certainly a centralization of data, right? And one of the big challenges of centralization to data today is we're seeing data born. I think everyone touched on this. We're seeing data born in more and more places all the time. If I roll back 15 years to when I built an ETL pipeline, I had 4 or 5 connectors. They were all relational platforms, and I moved it from A to B, right? Now I look at it, we've got cloud-born applications, we've got other clouds, we've got hybrid, existing data centers. That integration, in and of itself is hard. And when you achieve it, I think the next thing that's critical is you cannot, or certainly not without meeting a lot of resistance, try and push your users towards a tool that is bound to that data. And so data scientists are a great example, right? If I walk up to a data scientist who spent their whole life in RStudio and say, I want you to hit a Python notebook, I will be met with resistance, right? I need to enable them with the tools they are comfortable with, because if they're comfortable with them and they're familiar with them, they will be productive with them. And so something that we focus really hard on is enabling all of these tools for the right personas without the need to copy data to each of these personas, because it is tightly coupled to that tooling. And once you do that and you can centralize that data, centralized one version makes governance and control of that data really easy, but empower people with the tools that they love and they're familiar with, I think you go a really long way to unlocking a lot of not just the value in the data, but the potential of the people and what they can do with that data as well.
But let me, okay, let's go a little bit further here. I mean, because obviously there's the organizational side, but there's also the fact that we now have not just one person like a CIO controlling the budget of IT now. Now we've got everybody, it seems, with some kind of autonomous budget, right? And they're out there buying technologies, and the net result is that there's a complete spectrum of technologies in the enterprise, and it just seems to me that data architecture is going to become seriously important here, because if you don't know how to put all these bits together, how on earth are you going to achieve the levels of productivity you expect to achieve?
I think you used a term that I think can be dangerous, which is centralize. I don't think we'll ever centralize all our data. We spend a lot of time, depending on organization, trying to build a field of dreams where data scientists and end users all come. And in the end, it's not about building a field of dreams. It's about building a team of teams, right? And how they work and use that data across the spectrum. And it's going to be certainly unified, and you're going to have to understand how you govern it. But to say we're going to centralize our data becomes, I think, a dangerous aspect of setting a standard that will always be harder and harder to get to as data becomes more and more out to the edge.
I agree. You're not going to get all data in one place. Yeah. Absolutely, right? But there will be common sets of data that need to be brought together to be, that becomes a fundamental physics problem at that point. Yeah,
absolutely. You have to certainly have your metadata and understand how you're governing it where it is. Our point is with, for example, what we do at TIBCO data virtualization is enable that data to be at rest wherever it is, to be able to bring it to do compute and augment your intelligence against it, and then move on, right? Versus thinking it's all going to be centralized in a single place.
But the other assumption here as well is I buy all these tools, and the assumption is they snap together like Lego bricks, and they don't, right? And so, do you see a need therefore for either an ability to share metadata, or is the answer we'll throw away all these bits and go and buy a common platform where it's all supposedly integrated? What's the answer here? Because you can't just assume all these things snap together, right?
They don't, but I would say, look, I think the biggest thing we've probably all together learned from clients is interoperability is not an option anymore. When we build products now, the first step is, all right, what's the ecosystem that we integrate with? Whether it's data from ThoughtSpot, ETL tools from TIBCO, integrating into Azure, that's fundamental to how we build products now. That was not the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago it was all right, we're all fighting our own war. We're going to create our castle. We're going to hope everybody comes to our castle. We'll serve great food. We'll serve great wine. There'll be a great party. Unfortunately, that's not exactly how it played out. So interoperability has become the de facto. Does it mean it requires skills? Yeah, for sure. And I think if there's a gap in the world right now, it's things like data scientist skills, data engineering skills. So we can all do better to encourage that. But I think interoperability has become at least how we build products.
It's challenging to be between two great platform providers. And I think, again, you'll find very few organizations that think they can say, this is my platform of choice for every single aspect of it. So for TIBCO, our goal is to essentially give you data sovereignty, to be able to control your data, understand where it is, even if it's resting in any of these great places, bring it together and run compute, right, and let your organization act as if you have centralized data without going through that action of putting in a data lake.
But I mean, in your keynote at TIBCO now a few weeks ago, I was there, you were talking about collaboration, right? And that's going to be important if we're going to get people pulling on the same rope. And yet, if they're all with different tools that don't plug into each other, then how do they even know what each is doing? You know, I mean, to me, that's why I'm wondering: is this a trade-off? Well, we don't go off and buy all these bits and hope to God they work together, or is it I go to a single platform, or I mean, even in the BI world, I mean, the same's true. I mean, how do you see this panning out? Because I mean, it's a frustrating thing for a lot of companies that they can't get all the tools they buy to work together.
I think organized chaos is a good thing, and we got to be getting comfortable with it. We are not talking about civil engineering where the building blocks haven't changed in 30 years. We are talking about computers industry where technology just changes every 2 years. Even within our own company, we talk about every 3 years we should be coming out with a new product that completely disrupts our previous product. And with so many startups and so many innovative companies coming along, I think the idea that we'll perfectly architect everything and one day we'll have kind of the dream architecture where everybody makes sense of everything is just not going to happen if you're going to be innovating at that pace and moving that fast in the world.
Okay.
At the same time, I think interoperability is really important, and partnership, as it was mentioned, it's important, and everybody's realizing the value of that, so that the right APIs are there, the right integration points are there, so that these tools, they may not fit like Lego blocks, but they will fit more.
But we have another complexity here, as we already talked about data, the sprawl moving out. And one of the big things here in Europe, of course, is privacy, right? We got GDPR, it's active legislation now. I noticed you guys have got it in California, by the way, now, right?
Yes.
So, and
first subnational regulation around data privacy.
There you go. So, clearly with a big sprawling mass, multiple data stores, multiple clouds, all the way out to the edge, I mean, privacy is a big deal because we have to know where that data is out there. I mean, and so, in that kind of situation, we just can't expect administrators to sit at every single technology and set policies up again and again and again and again and again everywhere. I mean, it seems to be that we want to be able to do this once and enforce it everywhere. I mean, and so I'm kind of curious as to how do you see this whole thing being simplified and managed?
Well, you mentioned being in TIBCO now in London. Thanks for joining us there, Mike. And you saw, our TIBCO Cloud Metadata launch, which is all about knowing where your data is at all times and driving that. And yes, there's regulations at supranational level with GDPR. Nations have theirs, and now they're subnational, right? And thinking in terms of my PII as an organization where that's managed, understanding and having data about my data is more important than ever before. We probably all just saw that the Berlin Data Protection Authority, right? That's the Berlin Data Protection Authority, just levied a 14.5 million euro fine on an organization because they called, and the authority called it, a data cemetery. They weren't archiving it correctly. It was still there. It was PII and not managed correctly. So, we used to have to think about data lakes turning into data swamps. Now, for goodness sakes, we have data cemeteries, right? And what's next? Like zombie data coming back to haunt us? So this is a real aspect of knowing where my data is, knowing what it's relevant to. We all know the aspects around, right? I have the regulations that govern where I'm processing it. I have the regulations that govern where my end user is, the regulations that govern my purpose, and finally regulations that govern their intent, what permissions they've given me. And understanding all of that with the framework of where is my data and what is it doing is critical. And we're striving to be able to do that across whatever platform it rests in.
You can architect for compliance, irrespective of any regulation that will come.
Right.
And that's what I encourage clients. Architect for compliance means you have a global data catalog So you understand metadata, how you represent that in the company. You've got an understanding of your sensitive data, so you can mask and protect data that is known to be sensitive. And you've got processes and procedures on who can access, and you understand who access stuff. If you do those three things, it's going to be hard to be not compliant with any regulation that may come. Now, devil's in details because everybody has a flavor of it.
Sure.
But I think the basic is do those three things, you'll be ready for GDPR, GDPR next, California, Brazil, I think is the next one that's coming. You'll be ready if you do those basics. I think what I see consistently is those things don't exist. People start with, let me understand sensitive data, which is fine, but if you can't manage the life cycle of sensitive data, then understanding it in a moment is kind of useless.
Right.
Right, so it's more than just the discovery of, I mean, you mentioned catalog there, which I think is real important, with the ability to automatically discover where the stuff is out there, because it's getting progressively harder to find it manually.
Right, and you have to use things like AI in the catalog because no humans can possibly keep up with the rate and pace of change in data, so you need AI that does data matching, that builds metadata, that automated, catalog creation, because there's not enough humans in the world to do that, unfortunately.
Okay, all right, let's move on then. Obviously, we've got a huge focus, I guess, of analytical workloads moving to the cloud. In fact, the survey, the Fourth Industrial Revolution survey that we aired the results here today at the conference, actually showed here in the UK and other parts of Europe a real shift of analytical workloads to the cloud, data warehousing moving to the cloud. I mean, it all sounds great, but I mean, is this just new data warehouses, or should we be talking about migrating existing systems to do that? And for example, like how is it that you're gonna, if I have a customer with 9 data warehouses, right? And if I move some of them to the cloud, and I've still got some on premises, and I've got management reports and I want to get access, I mean, how am I going to do that? I mean, so. If we are, first of all, do you think moving to the cloud is inevitable in order to run these kind of systems? And then secondly, if we're going to be in a hybrid world, how do we join that back to the data center?
Yes. So I think certainly we're seeing a massive movement to the cloud for the warehouse. I think more generally speaking, I think what we see, a lot of the value that customers get from moving, let me broaden it from data warehouse to analytics workloads, is they're very bursty. Right? When you look at operational systems that are running transactional systems, they're running pretty consistently. The elasticity of the cloud for running these very bursty analytical systems, I talk to data scientists, for example, who tell me they can only train their models on Sunday. On premises, they can only train their models on Sunday because they're not going to interfere with 9 to 5 production systems that are running on-premise systems. Moving to the cloud gives them a whole new world to actually do their job Monday to Friday. So I think there is a lot of value, and customers are seeing that in moving these workloads to the cloud. But I think to your point, Mike, it's hard. This is not a discrete machine that I can just live migrate to the cloud. We're often talking about massive volumes of data and 24/7 systems that are hitting that data. And so getting it from A to B consistently and flipping that over does require a degree of planning.
I mean, clearly as well, talking about scale, people talk about the benefits of the cloud being scalability and more users and all the rest of it. But I mean, it just seems to me that there's a lot of discussion and a lot of interest about migrating data warehouses to the cloud at the moment. And yet, if you want to migrate something to the cloud, I mean, you're talking about, in some cases, systems that have been around 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 15 years.
20.
Really deeply entrenched in businesses and all kinds of dependencies. And I've got to be able to migrate the data, I've got to migrate the schema, I've got to migrate the ETL jobs, I've got to migrate the security privileges, and all the differences between where I'm moving from to where I'm moving to, and test it and all the rest of it. There just seems to be a dearth of tooling out there to be able to help people get from, let's say, where they are at the moment to move over there. And I guess my question to you is this just all consulting services, or are you going to is there more to come if you think from the industry in terms of tooling to help this? Because this is a seriously challenging problem.
I almost believe it's the opposite to some degree, where compute continues to progress, sensors continue to progress to where some data is just going to live at the edge and be at the edge forever. Now, figuring out which data you need to be able to do that and burst on it is important, but it's just as important to be able to put some of my logic around my data back out to the edge. So at TIBCO, we're using Go as part of our open source FlowGo model, because we do believe, right, embracing open source from that aspect, to move some of that compute and thought processing all the way back out to the edge where some data is just going to be. And the trick will be, to your point, what's your strategy about which things need to come back in and which things can stay there and run compute, and where can you push logic out? We've gone, to your point, from where a data center was this point in time, now we're moving things to the cloud. At the same time, we're moving capabilities to the edge. So I think the idea of understanding your events and how that processes across your whole spectrum is going to be just as important as this move of your core data and compute to the cloud.
Yeah, what we are seeing at ThoughtSpot is we work both in cloud and on-prem. And when we started, 100% of our business was on-prem. Back in 2013, pretty much anybody with a serious business we talked to, if we talked about taking their data to cloud, they will throw us out. Right? And today what we're seeing is that about 80% of our business, if we don't say that we have something working in cloud, they'll throw us out. And so in a lot of companies, even very, very traditional companies, the debate is kind of done. And they have decided that they're going to move everything in cloud. Even something as traditional and as conservative as government, like Fannie Mae, they have decided that they're going to shut down their data centers in a couple of years, and they're going to move their workload in cloud. And most of what I'm seeing, the reason it's, yes, you can scale more, you can do a bunch of things in cloud, but it's primarily manageability, and it's the war for talent. If you continue to maintain your data centers, you need to hire people who can run them and bring modern technology stack, and they're just finding it very hard to keep going when there's another option where they can just put all that responsibility on the cloud providers.
Right. But you still feel there's more tooling to come to help customers do this? Because it's a big challenge. You want to make sure that you're able to do it, and your users are still going to end up with the same reports that they did beforehand. Because clearly you've got to carry user trust with you. Because there's a lot of moving parts here. And I guess the question is, I'm looking around the industry, and I just don't see. There seems to be a whole big gap in the market for like a bunch of tools to help you get there.
Mike, I think we overreact in the short term in the IT industry. Probably not a big surprise, but your first question was, are data warehouses moving to the cloud?
You're right.
If we'd been at this conference 5 years ago, we would have said data warehouses are over. Everything's moving to Hadoop, right? Didn't exactly happen. Now, Hadoop has played a critical role. Hadoop will continue to play a critical role. But my point is, speaking in absolutes in IT has never really resulted in the endpoint. I think there's certain workloads that are absolutely designed to be run in the cloud, should be run in the cloud. They're relatively easy to move because of that. If you're doing a lot of GPU or FPGA acceleration, doing it on the cloud is going to be crazy expensive. And so that probably should be cloud native, but doesn't necessarily need to be in a public cloud. Could be. Right. So I think absolutes are dangerous. I think the biggest tooling issue, to go back to your point, is how am I going to move huge data sets economically? That's a problem. Latency will continue to be a problem. 5G is not going to actually fix that for the kind of data things that we think about. So it's all about take the workloads that make sense to do that. If you try to forklift everything, you're going to be disappointed.
And that's our key focus at TIBCO, is exactly that. The connect, first and foremost, to the systems and the data that matters is part of what's in our core and our heritage. And so driving that aspect of the whole life cycle of your data is critical. To Rob's point earlier, we do believe that everything needs to be cloud native. So every single one of our engines is essentially delivered with the same cloud native engine, so we can run in containers or on-prem. And it's also able to support the data in other places. That's a table stake to be able to move there. But I think, to Rob's point, nothing happens in absolutes. And again, I believe more things move to the edge than actually move to the center in this world. And that's an interesting thing to think about. How do I connect all those things, unify that view, and then I can go make smarter, faster actions.
But in saying that, then, if we are in a hybrid world, and I think we are, All right. So if we're in a hybrid situation, I mean, if I look at this, I could give a business user a self-service tool with a bunch of connectors and go, you figure it out. Or each of you, Charles, you got Polybase, you got TIBCO data virtualization, and you got Cloud Pak for Data with data virtualization capability in there too. Do you see data virtualization as playing an important role here, being able to bridge the firewall and simplify access to data? Or is it that users, or maybe with a search engine index kind of idea, is the way around that problem? I mean, how do you see that panning out? I mean, is it just poor old user gets every release more connectors and go, you figure it out?
I think virtualization it's valuable, but it's complementary, right? If we get concrete on a workload, if I need to go and analyze 1 billion rows of data, and I need to do it at the most granular scale, which means I need to analyze a bit, I can't pre-aggregate it on a virtualized endpoint. Physics of that aren't going to work. Right? I could put 1 billion rows on the other side of the planet and virtualize over it, and I start my job and I've got to bring 1 billion over, and start again, I've got to bring the 1 billion again. I'll go back to my centralization. Centralizing that data once and operating over it locally is going to be a vastly more efficient way to do it. If you can push things remotely, if you can push predicates and joins and aggregates down to virtualized systems, sure, you could run those on the other side of the planet. And in a lot of scenarios, actually, you can realize some of the greatest latency error that I could say I've got pipelines or ETL that are maybe moving periodically, every hour, every couple of hours. And that little delta to that operational system, I could virtualize. And so I'm hitting my warehouse and giving my end users a single interface. And unbeknown to them, I'm pairing together virtualization and centralized data. And I'm giving them up to the second latest committed transaction insights over a 10-year history that's been centralized into my warehouse. So when you start to put the capabilities together, you can do some really, really interesting scenarios. Is the theme of sort of no absolutes? Absolutely. You're not going to build an end-to-end analytics solution to address everything purely on virtualization. And absolutely, you're not going to get everything in one place, or perhaps even just not in the timely nature in one place to do the up-to-the-moment analytics that you need to run.
I think virtualization unlocks a lot of things. So we have launched TIBCO data virtualization, and you saw that in London. And I'll mess this up. Anyone here from Finland or Norway or Sweden? Shoop. I can never pronounce it correctly. But they're the largest retailer of electronics and commercial gear. They basically used data virtualization to create a B2B enterprise. Right? You used to just think about what's in their supply chain and they connect. Now as they're connecting to other suppliers, virtualization also something that unlocks that. They don't have to hold on to the data. They can run analytics for their entire, essentially connected enterprise to do that. So I think it's a really powerful way to unlock, to your point, depending on the usage, access to a lot more data. And let it be stored where it's most economical, right? But let it be compute where it really matters, and then drive real insights so you can make smarter decisions.
I think what we're seeing is what's important is investing in tools that work the same way, whether it's in cloud or on-prem. So a lot of our customers, for example, Walmart, has a ThoughtSpot install with close to 100 billion rows on-prem, but now they've decided to move it into cloud, so they're slowly moving one use case at a time into GCP. But their end user experience is not changing at all. So unbeknownst to them, the data is slowly moving from on-prem to cloud. And there are a lot of customers in that boat who are not quite in cloud yet, but 2 years from now, they've been told that everything has to be in cloud. And so they're taking this approach where they will build everything on-prem, and slowly they will start moving things.
Right. Okay, so again, everyone's impatient. Everybody wants everything faster. In fact, I remember, again, Dan, you talked about smarter, better, faster in your session a few weeks back. But we kind of wanted untrusted data. And it seems at the moment that data and analytics tools are headed down this road of continuous integration, continuous delivery. And that seems to be a new thing in the world of data and analytics. So maybe data science started with that. But now we've got it, in ETL tools. We got it in data science. We had it in data science tools. We got it in even BI tools, starting to head down that road. With the adoption of DevOps into these technologies. So I mean, how do you do this? With data and analytics. I mean, we're taking people who are not software engineers. They've never really necessarily been involved in sort of CI/CD world before. And now we're saying, do we just give people, as I said earlier, all of these tools that they buy themselves and let them figure it out? Or are we trying to take the world of DataOps and kind of get into the kind of component-based building of these kind of systems, which is a very new concept to the world of data and analytics. I mean, what are you advising your customers to do here? Because this is a learning curve. I mean, I think they probably have software engineers in their organization absolutely perfectly fine with that, know it easily, can handle it easily. But the data and analytics professionals never had that world before. And all of a sudden, whether they like it or not, you look around the technology, it's coming. It's coming, it's pushing its way in. So what are you sort of seeing here? I mean, how are you dealing with this within your own technologies in order to, I guess, make this easy or easier for people in the data and analytics world who are totally unfamiliar with it?
So it's interesting. So, I mean, we actually shipped continuous integration, continuous deployment, database projects, version control, all of that sort of application lifecycle management for SQL Server a decade ago. Maybe we were the only ones, and no one knew about it, Mike. But what we didn't do is we didn't bring it into the cloud immediately for data warehouse at the time. And what was interesting is for all of the cool, amazing tech that we put into DW, the number one ask on the public forum for Azure by a factor of 3 was continuous integration and continuous deployment for Azure SQL Data Warehouse as it was at the time. So there was huge demand for it. It wasn't new and it was getting forced upon them. Maybe it was coming solely from the Microsoft ecosystem because we'd done it for SQL Server and that's so broadly deployed. Maybe a lot of SIs were getting together and pooling their votes to push that one up on the user voice. But certainly, I mean, there is huge demand for it. But I think for a lot of people, it's not necessarily brand new. Certainly not in the Microsoft ecosystem anyway, because it was called SQL Server Data Tools, and we shipped it. It's close to a decade ago now. But certainly, it's definitely becoming far more pervasive.
I spent a lot of my time working with customers, and they're looking at me like I got 3 heads when we start talking about things like integration with GitHub and all the rest of it. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, IT professionals building software, very comfortable with that world.
Yep.
But it's only this year, well, maybe with Microsoft exception, but it's definitely this year that we're seeing mainstream tooling starting to integrate with this world. And a whole bunch of new tech seems to be coming in on the back of that. And there's a kind of a learning curve to get over here. And I don't think it's just a learning curve. I think it's, if you look at what's done for software engineering, it's dropped the time it takes to build an application dramatically because of this kind of approach. And so the question is, well, how do you make that work in a data and analytics world to do exactly the same things? So how do we drop the length of time to do this? And I guess I'm just trying to understand what you're advising your customers to do here to get this and understand how to use it to achieve the same goal.
I think there's a bigger. So I'll go to a slightly bigger thought, Mike. I don't think this next generation is just about finding better tools to do what we do today. The thing we've been working on for the last couple of years in IBM research is how can we automate all the things that we don't really want to do in the first place? Think about the core functions of a CIO for things like proactive incident resolution, incident management, code vulnerability. These are not things anybody really wants to do, but they're all done manually, and people have to compile together hundreds of different tool sets to do that. Our focus is how do you actually avoid the go chase tool sets to do that, and can you start to use AI to automate all those tasks? And when you do that, a lot of the things that you're alluding to, not all of it, but a lot of that just goes away.
Yeah,
I think that's where this lands.
I would augment that and say, it is actually upon us product builders to use AI and UX to simplify it. Like when you use Google Docs, you're not realizing that it's version control, but it is. You can go back to any version you want. In the same way, the software, instead of pushing more complexity at the people who administer these tools, I think the product builders should be taking the UX approach and simplifying it so that they get the same functionality.
So effectively hiding the complexity and taking it away.
Yeah.
for us at TIBCO, for example, TIBCO Spotfire, which is visualization tool, right, that analysts use, and they can, we can build with TIBCO data science, roll out models, but we believe that AI is now foundational to everything we build. So AI, to Rob's point, needs to be embedded in what we do. So if I'm a data analyst, and I could be a citizen data analyst, we now drop AI in right over the top of a data set so they can see correlations between data they didn't see before. Mm-hmm. So to Rob's point, all those things that used to take time to go build a model to see, we believe if we put AI as a foundation into everything you do, you simplify it for those personas. You enable data scientists to help you build and find the most useful ones, but then you drop those relevant data points right there for any user to take advantage of.
Right, so I mean, I don't think we're anywhere close to maturity on AI going into software. So where is this taking us? I mean, you got to bear in mind. Let's think. What are we? 1988. Barry Devlin and Paul Murphy in IBM Dublin wrote the first paper on data warehouse. So here we are, 31 years down the line, and now we've got AI.
I wasn't there, just so you know.
I know.
I think it was in second grade.
Okay.
But I believe you. But thank you.
But I guess the point I'm making is where do you see AI going in the world of data and analytics? Is it complete automation? I mean, we've got automatic discovery with catalogs and everything else. Are we going to see automatic generation? I mean, we've had data warehouse automation for a long time. Are we going to tie those worlds? Are we going to go complete end to end here, or how do you see that panning out?
So the other leg that the products needs to...
Or even in usability of front-end tools.
Yeah. So I think everybody is very excited about AI, and AI kind of shows up everywhere in marketing. But the other thing that's really important is UX. And we've always taken sort of UX-first approach. Like, we do a lot of things in distributed systems, we do a lot of things on the AI side, but we hide that completely from the user. And for the user, it's the simplest possible interface so that they can get their job done. And it's then progressive disclosure, right? So we'll give you the most likely, most interesting option that you want. But if you want to go dig a little bit deeper, then there's a little bit more complexity exposed to you. And if you want more, then there's a little bit more complexity exposed to you. And if you design it that way, then AI doesn't need to be perfect, because it is not. You can kind of use the man-machine together to get the job done in the simplest possible way.
Interesting.
We agree with Amit. Like, AI is going to be critical. Users are going to continue to drive big aspects for a long period of time. Rob talked about how AI can help us govern and manage our data, but there's still going to be, I think, a large human interface for a long time. Sorry, Rob, you're...
No problem. I would use it. Look, today we can automate 80% of data prep. We can automate 80% of feature selection, algorithm selection, and that's all been built by humans. Imagine what it's going to look like when AI is actually building the AI, which is not that far off. Like, it's around the corner. Like, that's a complete different level of what you'll get in terms of automation. And I don't believe the fear factor that it's going to take everybody's job, because what it's going to mean is people will have more time to do the stuff that is more valuable anyway, as opposed to matching data sets, which nobody really wanted to do in the first place. So I'm pretty optimistic that as we get to AI, building AI, this will escalate at a level that we don't expect in a positive way.
Interesting. Okay, so we're kind of pretty well running out of time here. So perhaps I could just ask each of you to kind of sort of sum up, and it was so much to do, seemingly so little time to do it in, and technology wave after wave after wave, and the speed at which it's coming in it seems to be quickening. What would you say are the kind of critical success factors going forward, as far as your customers are concerned, to try and succeed with data and analytics across edge, multi-cloud, and data center environment? I mean, is there any, absolute do's and absolute don'ts here? I mean, what would you see you would advise?
So I would start. Please. I think at the end of the day, technology exists for a purpose. And what's important is to keep that purpose in mind and go to whatever tool, whatever technology that gets you there fastest and the best. And there's no point being religious about like I am attached to this platform or that platform. You have to really look at the innovation as it's coming. And I'm saying you have to literally, because if you don't, there are plenty of companies that are just going to go out of business in the next 10 years. There's a stat that says in 10 years, about half of the Fortune 500 companies are going to go under, and new Fortune 500 companies are going to show up. And guess what's the difference between those that survive and those that don't? It's basically how agile they are and how innovative they are. So you just have to find the most innovative solution in the market and go that solves your business problem, that gives you the most business value.
So I got a simple one. Do 100 AI projects next year. This isn't ERP. It's not like one big project with 100 people and multi-year project plans. Like do 100 AI projects. It's 6 to 8 people, 4 to 6 weeks. Half of them won't work. That's okay. Double down on the ones that work. Just by doing that, it will force you to go fix your data problems. It'll force you to figure out where does cloud fit, where does hybrid cloud fit, and where does multi-cloud fit. So do 100 AI projects. You'll learn a ton.
Interesting.
I'd agree. I would go back to start with the strategy and know that you have a culture of collaboration, so you don't get to the point where you are agile and doing 100 projects that don't at least align to what you're trying to do from your business strategy and the way you align your people. And in essence, like embrace this. More things right now are connected than were just 5 minutes ago. And tomorrow we'll have exponentially more data than we did 5 years ago. And in addition, absolutely nothing tomorrow will go slower than it did yesterday. Everything is going to go fast. I think the Mercedes AMG F1 team, which you've seen out there, and we're really happy for them to have their 6th year in a row of championship. And a lot of that is what we've been able them to do, to connect to their data, 50,000 data points a second, to make smarter decisions, and more importantly, to take faster actions. We think the future is fast. We like to say it's TIBCO fast.
Okay.
I think I agree with you. Like everyone wants to move faster. Common themes, do more with less. I think one of the core principles that we sort of adhered to, or one of the things we tried to solve when we built Synapse, was time to solution. The cloud absolutely solved time to provisioning. You can walk up, you can provision infrastructure in a matter of minutes today in the cloud, any cloud, it doesn't really matter. What we really looked at is taking a lot of exactly, I think what Rob touched on, some of those mundane tasks that go with provisioning cloud services and stitching and all of that integration to make sure you're in compliance, and you get different SLAs and all sorts of complexity, and folding what was the most common pattern that we could identify in building cloud analytical solutions, and just taking all of that burden off the user. And for us, the measure of success will be as we roll out Synapse more broadly in 2020, and what we'll look to work with a lot of our customers are you getting from provision to solution vastly quicker than you have been, even just in the last couple of years, or even though you've been building on cutting-edge cloud technology.
Right. And I guess in a way, if you take that further out, your 100 AI projects is kind of like, well, are you getting to achieve what you want in business faster as a result of being able to take complexity away and take the mundane things out of business and automate them? Okay, well, that's been a fascinating 45 minutes. I'm really grateful to all of you for traveling such a long way to be here. I'd like to thank you all on behalf of all of us here, and hope to see you back next year at Big Data London. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.